everybody, how's it going? Thanks for joining me this afternoon. I've got a great stream with a great guest that I think you're really going to enjoy. You know, Vladimir Lenin had this famous quote, there are years where nothing happens, and then there are weeks where decades happen. And we are definitely living in the weeks where decades happen. Just last week, I said, you know, Nate Hochman, he's a good guy. He's been doing all this great work when it comes to NGO funding and how all these different programs are actually funded by the government. I'm going to have him on. We'll talk about that a little bit. And then this week, like, the whole thing has been blown open. Elon has been going hard in the paint on this. Trump, JD Vance, everyone is doing this full court press on knocking out US aid. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. So we're still going to talk about the NGOs, but there's just this entire sprawling thing that we can get into. So Nate, thanks for coming on, man.
Thanks so much for having me, man. Good to be here.
Absolutely. And I'm glad that you're finally the executive director over at America 2100, so I don't have to like call you a journalist or something. Like,
thank God. Yeah. Journo days are over for now, at least. Self-hating journo.
So some other many such cases as one myself. Welcome to the club. We're working our way through the 12 steps. Yeah, I guess we'll start at the beginning here. We don't have to rehash the whole thing because I talked a little bit about USAID yesterday in my piece for The Blaze. But, obviously, we both know that a massive amount of what constitutes the left-wing patronage network is really the U.S. government, that the U.S. government is funding this stuff, grants, all kinds of different programs through many different executive agencies and other parts of the government. This money is being funneled through all these different organizations, both abroad and at home. And that is much of what perpetuates the left-wing worldview. Yes, I think these people actually believe in a lot of this, but ultimately they're getting paid. And when you're getting paid, your passion to spread this kind of stuff goes up through the roof. And that's why we've seen so much of it throughout America. Now, Elon Musk obviously has turned the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, onto USAID, which was the foreign aid arm of the United States government, or one of them, and was responsible for a large amount of funding throughout the globe. And much of it was propping up left-wing journalism, pushing left-wing values, funding operas and comic books for transgender rights in different South American countries. We don't have to break down every bit of that, but what was your reaction to the way in which this kind of exploded into the news this week?
Yeah, critics of the move on both the kind of squishy right and the sort of legacy left point out that the USAID budget is only a couple percentage points max of the overall federal budget. But that's only because the overall federal budget is like the largest government budget in the history of the human race, right? Like we spend so much, such an unbelievable, almost, uncountable amount of money just on entitlements that hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars a year is like a drop in the bucket relative to that. But it's still hundreds of billions of dollars a year. And what it's spent on is an extraordinarily powerful propaganda, subversion, political agitation empire, which touches not just the ends of Western civilization, but the entire world. Look, I'm an American nationalist. I'm an America firster. I think that the fundamental and singular purpose of American government is to serve and advance the interests of the American nation and the American people. With that being said, I do feel a common cause with people in the West. We share a civilization. We share a common heritage. And the West is the civilization that gave birth to my country, right? We are tied not just by shared sort of heritage and ancestry, but all kinds of different, civilizational bonds. And also, right-wing nationalists in Western countries across the Western world, we do have material shared interests we should be advancing together. So all of that being said, like my government was funding the subversion, not just of my country, but of every single country effectively in the entire Western world. And as an American, it outrages me first and foremost because of what it's doing to my country. But what is happening right now in a really sort of world historical revolutionary sense is for the first time in well over half a century, the yoke is being lifted off of the backs of patriots and nationalists in Western countries, pretty much in every single nation in our civilization. And it's difficult to overstate how significant that is.
Yeah, you know that ultimately you're working against an overwhelming force, and you think, well, that's because they must have all the talent, or it's because they must have all the skill, or maybe they really are on the right side of history. And no, it turns out that actually there's an 800-pound gorilla on the scale. And that's, like you said, oh, it's just a rounding error in the federal budget. Well, the rounding error in the federal budget is worth the GDP of several countries. So it turns out if you turn loose the GDP of several countries into propaganda, even if it doesn't add up to the totality of Social Security, it's still a pretty big deal. And actually, you can actually buy the opinions of several countries by just wielding that amount of money. And I think a lot of people were shocked that media outlets like the BBC, its media action arm, had to basically shut down operations because we're their second largest contributor. Politico was not able to make payroll because it turns out that like a large percentage of their subscription service is tied to the U.S. federal government's budget. It was a lot of people probably guessed that we were, paying for the queering of dolphins somewhere in Zimbabwe. But I think they were shocked to find that even major first world media outlets were highly dependent on aid coming from a program that is theoretically out there to like ship AIDS medication to Africa or something.
No, totally. I mean, the word regime is sort of overused in our circle these days, but it does illustrate how much every single left-wing institution, not just in the US, but global left liberal institutions and the sort of local arms and appendages of them across the Western world are connected to one another. And one of the fundamental ways they're connected to each other than these sort of transnational bureaucracies, which are themselves kind of extensions of the American government, is this gigantic, unending, perpetual tax dollar gravy train, which is just a redistribution of wealth from the American middle class to, queer left-wing activists in, Southern Germany or whatever, pick your thing. So I think most of us who sort of pay attention to these things had known for a while that this was going on. We understood the sort of basic contours of the system. And you can dig through USAID grants and find out like X program that we're funding, X outrageous like transgender orchestra in like, Romania or whatever, right? Like you can kind of find that stuff, and on a case by case basis, you can point out that we're funding it and everyone gets mad for a couple of days and then they move on. But you can't fully understand the extent to which like this was an entire system that was propped up this way until all of a sudden, to your point, they cut the spigot off, and all of these major legacy dominant institutions are just like, we're broke. We have to lay off half our workforce. This was 80% of our budget. Like that was a thing they were talking about in Ukraine. Something like 4 or 5 out of 5 of the independent media outlets there were funded. 80% of their budget was USAID. So
yeah, that's how we do color revolutions, baby. That's
exactly right. Yeah, right. Exactly. So the entire Ukrainian independent media was just the USAID. It was just the US government, which again isn't totally shocking. But even to me, the extent and the scope of it was breathtaking.
Yeah, and again, it's not like these guys were just stealing. It's not just graft, right? Which would be bad enough. Like there are people who can't afford houses. There are people who can't feed their families. There are people who can't get an education, can't send their kids to a good school, and you're just taking that money from them. Like that would be evil enough if you were just stuffing it into your mattress somewhere. But it's not even that. It's yes, you're hiring leftists in these artificial jobs. But like you said, we're specifically have a mandate to do things like USAID had a specific mandate to increase LGBTQI plus Rainbow ABC coalition inclusion in these countries. So we are specifically paying to queer the children. We are specifically paying to groom the children of foreign nations. We also had different programs that were designed to encourage and pay off organizations that lobbied for restrictions on social media in relation to U.S. companies. So the U.S. government was paying foreign nations to try to impose regulations on U.S.-based social media in order to encourage censorship. They were paying NGOs across the globe to try to put pressure in their countries on our country to censor our own companies and our own speech. Again, you know it's bad. You know that government is going to siphon off a certain amount of money, that there's going to be waste and fraud and abuse. And that's what I think most people thought of when they saw Doge at first. Like, oh, great, another Ron Paul, let's cut, 10% out of the budget by looking at the waste fraud. No, this is the real Ron Paul plan, right? Like, no, let's get after it. Somewhere someone's screaming, the Fed next, the Fed next. But you know what I'm saying? Like, the fact that this wasn't just graft, it wasn't just theft, but it was active harm, active evil done in the name of the U.S. people is just horrible.
Absolutely. I'm most certainly not a libertarian, but something that I have come to understand and appreciate more over the last couple of years, and this is something that both like the paleo-libertarians and the paleo-conservatives were talking about decades ago, so it's not an original insight. If anything, it's worse now, is the extent to which all of the cultural institutions that we hate, all of the sort of subversive actors and activist groups and gigantic NGOs and advocacy, lefty, XYZ groups, both in the United States, in all of these respective Western nations, and on the sort of international bureaucratic stage, are essentially extensions of the American federal government to one extent or another, even if it's not a one-to-one where it's like the American government is directly paying their salary. They're funding some gigantic foundation, which is handing out grants. You go down the line and you can find upstream the American taxpayer is funding it to a substantial extent. And to your point, it's not just that it's happening because it's an international system. It's not just that it's happening here and in other countries. We're funding these international bureaucracies, which are turned into weapons and then aimed right back at the American people, right? So the American government for some time has been outsourcing the things that are so egregious that it can't quite get away with it because of sort of the remaining sort of constitutional protections that still exist. There's still some limits on what they can do directly. So they outsource censorship to big tech. They outsource the promotion of degeneracy to, all these sort of international NGOs. But it's still fundamentally the US government that is at the heart of this entire system. And this is why Doge is not just this sort of kind of libertarian, cost-cutting, efficiency and budget hawkishness project. It's actually a gigantic and, again, world historical cultural victory that is being waged and is being won.
Yeah, I know that this is my moderate and centrist position. I know I'm very squishy on this, but I think a lot of people need to go to jail for the rest of their lives. Again, I know that's like the moderate thing to say about this, but the fact that the U.S. government on both ends, like we know this for a fact now, this isn't some conspiracy theory. This isn't me donning my Alex Jones, though Alex is right as often as he is wrong. Like, this isn't me donning my tinfoil hat here. We know for a fact that at both ends, the U.S. government was actively pressuring corporations and hiring their employees and inserting government operatives into those corporations in order to censor people in the United States, and bribing foreign entities to pressure their governments to censor United States citizens. That is a violation of the First Amendment at every level. That is a betrayal of the United States government. That is a betrayal of the United States people. That is treason. It's just straight treason. There's no other explanation for it. These are treasonous people who specifically conspired with foreign governments and foreign entities to censor and violate the Constitution of the United States and censor the people of the United States. They should be in jail for the rest of their life because I'm a bleeding heart liberal. Like that is the situation that we are in. And we only got through the first audit. Like, this is just the first one. This is just the smallest bit of what Doge is going to do. It's absolutely insane.
Well, and with USAID, they really shot themselves in the foot. Speaking of the moderate centrist option, this was something that Rubio was talking about in an interview where he's getting pressed by, I can't remember, some lib journalist about taking over USAID. And he said, originally, we just wanted to do an audit of what they were funding. And they refused to cooperate and then sued us, because they have been used to being this totally unaccountable, insulated entity for so long that does not conceive of itself and functionally does not have any democratic accountability or even any oversight from other bureaucrats, from, political appointees, that is completely insulated from anything that could be recognizably described as democracy or self-government or republicanism or whatever. And they've been used to winning for so long because for generations, they have had no effective oversight. And when anyone tried to do any modicum of oversight or at all, they kind of kicked into gear and defeated those efforts, that they thought they could get away with it. And this time was different. This time you countersue and they say, okay, well, you're not in charge of the USAID anymore. This is ours now. We're going to cut 90% of the people who work here, and the Secretary of State's going to be running this bureaucracy now. So it's insane from top to bottom. And to your point about treason and people going to jail, it's true of censorship. It's also true. I mean, this is true in at every node of this system, but it's also very visible in immigration, where you've got these gigantic NGOs which exist singularly. This is something people have to understand. Their singular purpose of existence, their modus operandi, is to subvert and undermine U.S. immigration law. That's what they exist to do. That's what they're funded to do. That's what their day-to-day activities are directed towards. And that is the fundamental purpose of those organizations. And their budgets are largely comprised of U.S. tax dollars, primarily, though not exclusively, from the U.S. State Department. So the federal government is funding groups to undermine the laws it's supposed to be enforcing. Right? Yes. It's funding groups like HIAS, for example, which Mayorkas was on the board of before he served as DHS secretary, to literally run an end-to-end mass migration network where they have way stations all down through South America and Central America, and humanitarian transportation vans ferrying people up to the U.S.-Mexico border, and then have an army of lawyers waiting at the border there to tell them how to subvert U.S. immigration laws. And then they've got vans waiting there and cash and envelopes, courtesy of the U.S. taxpayer, waiting to ferry them into the interior. So that organization gets billions, if not hundreds of billions of dollars from us every single year. That if you want to talk about treason, I think that's pretty much a textbook definition of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, that was our original discussion we were going to have, right? As you did great work finding out that Springfield, Ohio was not the only town that had the kind of mass immigration directed specifically by the government that we saw there that sparked so much of this immigration debate. And so, that was going to be our original topic. But obviously, like you said, immigration now is just one node, one aspect of this giant network. And the importance of this network can't be overstated. Because as you and I have talked about before, and as the good old boys, Bog Beef and Merrick are famous for pointing out, patronage is the lifeblood of politics. I'm going to say this over and over again. I'm going to beat the GOP to almost unconsciousness with this point until they get it, because they still have not got it at all. And it's very clear from the behavior. The left is not winning because they won the argument. The left is not winning because they have the moral superiority. The left is winning because they pay their activists. They pay their activists. One more time for the people in the back. They pay their activists. When you're left wing, you get hired, you get defended, you get funded, you get rich. That's why people are leftists. A lot of them adopt the belief. They eventually, I think, actually believe it, because it's hard for people to both act on a ideological system and profit from it and not eventually absorb some of its tenets. But ultimately, like, people are like, oh, how can all these leftist media outlets, go woke and have no viewers, but they don't go broke? Oh, because you're paying for it. Mm-hmm. You're the sucker. Like, that's why, as you point out, so many of these leftists, they got fired from a job. No, they didn't. They bounced to another NGO. They're on their feet 2 minutes later. They've got a new job somewhere else. They're making a ton of money. There's a vast network of your tax dollars out there in every aspect of government, NGO work, everything you can imagine. And you are funding the left-wing revolution. While the right's like, yeah, but have you tried managing a Panda Express? Enough of this garbage. Enough of this. I never want to hear about this again. Right-wing people need to start funding their politics. You want to win? Make an investment. Stop talking to me about Panda Express. In the meantime, dismantle the patronage network of the other guys, which is just the beginning of what is happening here.
Absolutely. And this is something that, James Burnham and then Sam Francis wrote about pretty extensively. It's structurally laced into the nature of the political system, of the regime, which is to say, as you were alluding to, all of these ostensibly independent institutions, media, big tech, the federal bureaucracy, the academia, et cetera, the NGO industrial complex, are not independent really in any meaningful sense of the word at all. They're the sort of walls of separation between the two are fictional. People move through them fluidly. So you leave one job, maybe you get fired, quote unquote, from that job. You bounce up at another institution in a few weeks. All these people are educated at the same institutions. They live in the same sort of concentrated geographic enclaves. They profess the same worldview. They're reading from the same book, et cetera. And in many cases, they know each other, or they know people who know each other. And that's only been even more true in the sort of digital interconnected age. So you've got these power centers, Silicon Valley, New York, DC, et cetera, where a lot of these institutions are centered. And these institutions are not independent from one another at all. It completely makes the sort of public-private distinction anachronistic. That doesn't exist in any meaningful sense anymore. So you saw, like, big tech in the Biden administration, for example, when Biden staffed up, his transition team was stacked with big tech people. And all of those big tech people were alumnus of the Obama administration. So they had gone into the Obama administration. When Trump came into power, they left and took cushy C-suite jobs out in Silicon Valley or at sort of Silicon Valley adjacent NGOs. And then when their guys got back into power, they came right back into the federal bureaucracy. Guess where they went when Biden left office? Back to Silicon Valley, right? Or some NGO that was related to Silicon Valley. So that's how gigantic this patronage network is. And it's a trans-institutional patronage network. It exists across all of these different institutions. And the right, if it wants any chance of victory long-term, to your point, has to start building those systems out now. We have the power, finally, but more importantly, and this is what makes this moment unique, we have people in power who understand what that power is and how to use it. This is the moment, not just to burn down the old patronage networks, although that does have to be the first order of business, but to start establishing new ones.
Exactly. And, a lot of people look at what is happening here and they say, oh man, how can we ever overcome this? How can we ever dismantle this? How can we ever get through this? But the answer is as rapidly as possible. We're seeing the importance of just rapid action, right? Moving so quickly, you have no idea where Trump is going to go next. And you can see this, the flurry of executive orders. The left was already reeling when it came to Trump's election, and they did not expect him to have the mandate. They did not expect him to kind of have the overwhelming majority that he had. They also did not expect him to come out of the gate acting as quickly as he did. And the fact that he has moved from one thing to another so quickly means the left has not had a narrative that they can grab onto. And then with this one, the USAID one, they thought that they had the big one, right? Like, we're going to show all these starving poor people in foreign countries, and the people, everyone's going to recognize what a big mean old billionaire Trump and Elon are, and where they're going to be so angry at them. This is going to be it. This is going to be our moment. And all it's done is have the Streisand effect, right? Like you have this thing where people are like, oh, well, what is going on there? What is happening there? And all of a sudden these floodgates open and it becomes so clear what is happening. And it's just critical for the administration to continue this pace. They've been incredibly impressive up to this point. There's still a long road to go. But speaking of impressive steps by the regime, the new regime, the better regime, speaking of new steps from Trump and company, the fact that there's this guy, Marco Els, and he's I probably said that wrong, but he's one of the staffers working with Musk on Doge, right? He's over at SpaceX, and he joined him. He got brought over to be one of these guys who's auditing everything. And so I guess the Wall Street Journal figured out that this guy had an Anon account, and he had said stuff that, they're like, oh, he said things like the Civil Rights Act should be abolished. And well, yeah.
No.
Not like that. But yeah, he said something about he wouldn't want to marry outside of his ethnicity, which again is okay, I think pretty sure he's allowed to decide who he wants to date. So, ooh, very scary. But they said, they brought this stuff up, and all of a sudden he resigned, right? Which we know was not the case. And everyone said, hey, what are we doing here? right? Like the response from especially the online right was, I thought we were done with cancel culture. I thought we rejected this at the ballot box. I thought leftist cancellations, especially journalists digging around in someone's Twitter history, like I thought we had moved beyond that. And the fact is that if you start off the administration, if you look at the first Trump administration, right, he had a number of people he wanted to bring in who were on his side, who believed in his mission, but the media got a hold of them. They started getting into the vetting process. They started throwing out all this dirt and, pulling up all these obscure things. They couldn't get the Senate confirmations. People got fired. Guys like Darren Beattie get thrown out for going to a Vidaire meeting at some point. And all of a sudden, all these like heavy hitters who were critical to getting the work done, they get pulled out of the administration. You get John Bolton slotted in and nothing gets done. The swamp takes over, right? You can't let that happen again. You cannot let that happen again. And so many people, myself included, said immediately, this is a huge mistake. You cannot let the left have this power. You cannot go around canceling people. And to their credit, Elon immediately said, hey, should we be hiring this guy back? Should we be letting him back in? And J.D. Vance, the vice president of the United States, the man, the second poster in chief, comes on and says, you know what? I don't agree with everything this guy said, but we shouldn't be doing this. We shouldn't be giving left-wing journalists wins. We should be getting this guy back in. We should be rehiring this guy. That's amazing. Can imagine any Republican at all, but especially like Mike Pence doing something like that, standing up for the Anons, like standing up for the Anon posters and saying, you know what? This guy's effective. He's doing his job. Who cares what he said online? Let's get him back in there. Do like a basketball player who said something weird, right? Like, oh yeah, sorry about whatever. Let's move on. I got to, score some more baskets. Like, just, do that little thing and just get out of here. And boom, like this, I don't know what the status is as of now, but I got to imagine with Elon and JD Vance both saying, hey, should we hire this guy back? I think we're probably pretty back.
Yeah, I'm optimistic, cautiously. Look, who knows what's going to happen, but the sort of momentum right now, it follows a sort of a path that we have seen many times over the last 12 months, where the conversation that starts online gets endorsed by sort of heavy power players, and then, the thing that people were talking about online eventually becomes a political reality. As an aside, this is what we were talking about offline before we went live. It's a self-serving narrative, but it happens to be completely true. The online right now is a major faction in the conservative movement infrastructure. Undeniable. Even people who hate everything about the online right and hate what they stand for, they have to admit this begrudgingly, because the online right now is where all of these major new power players in the administration and the kind of right wing more broadly are. They're either a part of it or they're directly influenced by it. And what that means is you have something like this happen, which, to your point, during the first Trump administration or any time before that, the Wall Street Journal writes this hit piece, it's over, right? That kid's out. You probably can't find a job for a while, if ever. He might be screwed long term. Certainly, you're not going to have the vice president of the United States and the richest man in the world going to bat for him. But that's what we're seeing now. And Vance, I think, is a particularly potent example of this. But what Vance said, and this is true, you don't even have to endorse everything the kid said to make the case for rehiring him. It's a structural argument. You cannot give journalists a veto over your staffing decisions. That's what they've effectively had for my whole lifetime, much longer than that probably, where essentially if they get to decide the Overton window of your administration, your enemies get to decide the ideological limits of your administration. If they just don't like somebody and they write a big hit piece and, dig up something that they said online or something like that, you go, okay, yes, sir. Say jump, you ask how high. That, again, just structurally cannot be permitted to continue if the right actually wants to be a real political opposition force in America. And the fact that you're seeing those arguments made now by the vice president of the United States just goes to show how far we've come.
Yeah, you have this scenario. Yeah, there has forever been this imbalance, right? You've had this scenario where the left basically had veto on every right-wing decision. The minute that they found anything in someone's past, anything that they might have misstepped on, missaid, even an association, they went to the wrong meeting at some point. The minute they have that, it's over for that person, right? And so if they ever say anything, if they ever do anything in office, if they rub the wrong people the wrong way, even though they're Republicans, they immediately get canceled by the left, and the right will just entirely abandon them, if not pile onto them, right? And that's really the key. Is up to this point, it's not just the pressure that the left could bring, it's that the right joined in because they thought that made them somehow like morally good. Like, oh, I'm one of the good ones. I don't like the racism either. Oh, that guy, he posted a thing. Oh yeah, who did a racism? We got to get rid of him. Like somehow like being, the David French, being the strange new respect guy for the left was so important to so many people on the right. And that's because so many conservatives were just echoing a bunch of left-wing beliefs, but slower, right? And now you're at this point where the right is actually gaining some momentum. It actually has its own beliefs, and it recognizes the importance of backing up people, right? And you're somebody who has dealt with this before, had to face cancellation pressures. You understand the value of having a bunch of people who are standing right behind you, right? Saying, look, you're not going to get fired, or if you do get fired, you're going to have a place tomorrow, just like the left does. If a left-wing activist declared himself a communist, said he loved Mao and Stalin, no one cares, man. Like, they don't care. You're going to have a professor job tomorrow. But if you said you love mid-century German guys, and you shouldn't, but if you say that, you're completely unemployable for the rest of your life. That is just an asymmetry that is insane, right? Like, you shouldn't be doing either of these things, but the fact that the left can do them all day long, and the right can, if they just, signal in a direction one time that they may agree with something someone said, and that's cancelable for the rest of their life, you just can't allow that to continue to exist. And so the fact that, J.D. Vance is willing to get up there and say, no, that's not what we're doing anymore. That era is over. I mean, that's big for this one guy, of course. That's huge for Marco, right? Like, good for him, and I'm glad he has that backing. But this is huge for everyone. This signals a change across the entire network of conservative activists and organizations and everything else. This is the tone now. This is what we believe. This is how the vice president handles it, and it's how you better handle it as well. That is huge. That completely changes the game, especially for young people who are trying to get involved in this, but had to constantly be worried that somewhere online there was some post that was going to completely destroy their lives. And now the vice president says, guess what? We don't do that anymore. We don't care what the left thinks. We're hiring the best people. We're moving forward.
No, you're absolutely right. And one of the fundamental problems with the right dating back decades and decades when it came to this dynamic is partially it's exactly what you said, which is that you have all of these sort of legacy conservatives who are eager to prove how non-racist and how neutered they are to the left, to prove to them that essentially they're the loyal, controlled opposition. They wouldn't put it in those terms, but that is fundamentally what these people's orientation is. The other problem is that every time a left-wing hit piece on some right-winger kind of hit the mat, conservatives who were part of sort of different internecine factions would see it as an opportunity to enact their own internecine grievances on enemy factions within the right? So, and this was especially true of the sort of hegemonic conservatives, because, I've been canceled multiple times, but I also, part of what also informs my experience of this thing is like, I worked at National Review out of college, right? Which is kind of like the legacy conservative publication par excellence. And I have to say, like, one of the things that really struck me as this young conservative who is still kind of figuring out ideologically what he believed was these guys hated people to their right way more than they hated people to their left. Like, a lot of these people got out of bed every day, and the first thought they had was like how much they hated people to their right. And they went to bed every night. And the last thought they had before they went to sleep was how much they hated people to their right. So when you have that mentality in dominating those sort of legacy conservative institutions where you hate people to your right with a much more bitter passion than you hate people to your left, when the left-wing hit pieces comes on against someone to your right, like you are going to boost it, you're going to endorse it, you're going to celebrate it, because those are your real enemies. That's who you see as your real enemy, the people to your right, not the people to your left. And that dynamic has been totally inverted as well, because that sort of gatekeeping institutional function on the old right is essentially has been completely taken out. It doesn't rule the right. It doesn't govern the right anymore. Those people themselves have been marginalized and they've been deprived of their political power. So the result is the people who are in power now, when they receive a hit piece from the left, everyone circles the wagons. And in some ways, I have a degree of sort of marginal survivor's guilt, because I came of age. I got canceled at least twice, probably more than that. And I came of age as a young guy right as the right's disposition towards these things was totally fundamentally transforming. And I look back at young guys who got canceled for sort of similar transgressions, even a couple years before me, who got totally nuked from orbit. And there isn't like a grandfather clause. You know, you don't get to sort of get back when you were nuked. And a lot of them ended up doing fine for themselves. But the kids coming of age now who are going to make stupid decisions and get a hit piece, which they will, because that's what young men on the right do very well. They have a support system and a kind of instinctive circling the wagons impulse that just did not exist a decade ago. And it's going to serve them and us, the entire institutional right, very well.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to focus on what you're saying there about you have the dynamic where these established institutions like National Review, all they want to do is punch right. They hate everyone to their right. That's their most aggressive thing. Their mission in life, and there are several other institutions I won't name because they constantly come after me. But they're constantly attacking people to the right. But it's not just the institution versus kind of the vanguard dynamic, which is there. Again, as you point out, the left embraces their vanguard, the right attacks their vanguard. But on top of that, it's the young versus the old, right? As you said, it's the young right-wing guys tend to be much more to the right, just like the young left-wing activists tend to be much more to the left. And while the left, entertains and elevates and incorporates those more left-wing elements into their movement with their vanguard, the right actively attacks them. So they're not just attacking people to the right, they're attacking all their young activists. They're destroying all their young talent. And that's why for so long, the right just had this complete dearth of young talent coming up, because who wanted to be a part of this movement? Like, if you're on the left, you're cool, you're trendy, you're making money, you're set in this network that's going to take care of you. You can say whatever you want, believe whatever you want. You're only going to hear good things from people. Women are going to want to be a part, whatever. Like, all this stuff is great. If you're a young person on the right, it's like, well, if you move to the right of Paul Ryan, you're going to get fired and be completely unhireable for the rest of your life. Who's signing up for that project? Like, no one in their right mind. So this not only shifts the political dynamic, but also the age and talent dynamic. So young right-wing guys who are talented, they want to get involved now because there's a future there. There's a promise of really being able to say what you believe, fight for it, and have a future. You're not just going to get completely destroyed. You're not going to just step on a landmine and explode the minute you say anything that might have made Bill Clinton uncomfortable at some point. And so I think that's a huge deal because it's a generational win for the right. It really changes the dynamic inside its institutions and just across the political map.
That's exactly right. I think the other dynamic that has infused the right with a kind of youthful vigor, even as the left becomes kind of enervated, is that for the first time, again, at least in my lifetime, like, the right is the cool side. I hate the phrase conservatism is the new punk rock. It might be true. It just makes me viscerally cringe. I can't fully explain it. But it is true to an extent that, like, not only is the right transgressive now, whereas the left, in the 90s, the left was the sort of challenging the social order and the right was the kind of fuddy-duddy religious right, moral Puritans. They happen to be right about all of those moral issues, but that was kind of the perception if you're this young person. Young people have a kind of desire to self-actualize, to challenge the existing norms and social order, et cetera. They are predisposed, especially young men, towards a kind of transgression, and not just a good society, but a good political movement channels that impulse towards productive things. For a long time, that was the left. The left used that impulse to basically create militant foot soldiers to challenge the existing social order. Now that the left is the social order, and people who came of age in my generation as Zoomers, we came of age by the time that was already stale and cliche. I think one of the big differences between us and millennials, no offense to the base millennials who are out there, is
some of us might be interviewing you right now.
I know, that's right. I was, present company accepted, of course.
Right.
Is when millennials came of age, the sort of proto-wokeness was just taking shape and emerging. And it was kind of like the hip new thing all the language and the new norms and everything about it was widely adopted because it was very much enmeshed in youth culture. By the time we came of age, it was already the butt of a joke, right? It was already cliche and stale and played out and cringeworthy and something that like these dorky HR bureaucrat kind of like janitors yelled at you on college campuses. So it engendered this counter reaction. And simultaneously on the right, especially the sort of young online right, there was an entire universe of not just transgressive, but funny and compelling sort of communities, political communities that was available to people. So the right is funnier than the left. They have all the sort of appealing transgressive elements that make them appealing to young people. And, you know, especially on the online right, they make better arguments. Like this is the thing is the left has not had to make real political arguments for decades precisely because of the political system that we were just talking about. And they have no idea how to respond to the actual arguments being made by the young sort of ascendant right. Like the young ascendant right, they're not just cool and they're not just making good arguments. There's a sort of mimetic power to everything they do that is just stunning to the left, which is why the left is fighting a rearguard action right now.
Yeah, I feel like for the very first time in a long time, because the right was trained on Arrakis, you know, we can fight in ways that they just can't, right? Like for the first time in a long time, we figured out the new mode of communication, the new way that technology was going to work before the left did. And they were just not ready for that. They had been so dominant for so long. They had locked down everything, you know, music, movies, television, news media, books, like it was all theirs. And they owned all end to end, every bit of the process. And they knew it, you know, at most, you know, conservatives could knock out some Christian movie that played in like 10 theaters somewhere with an actor who hadn't worked in 20 years. Like that was the extent of right-wing media and its ability to communicate with the culture. And because for so long, what was building under the surface was, well, building under the surface, the left was able to, well, we can censor it. We can throw the algorithm at it. You know, we can bury it on YouTube or Twitter or whatever. And ultimately, yeah, maybe these guys kind of dunk on us whenever they get the opportunity, but we've got control of this, right? Like we know how to manipulate the market. But because we got so good, you know, you know, Arrakis was made to train the faithful, baby. And like we got good at you know, moving around this, manipulating, evading the censorship, evading the algorithms, finding different ways to assess and attack from different positions. And they just couldn't handle it. They just didn't know what to do. And the fact that has just been bootstrapped into the administration itself is pretty surreal, but here we are.
You know, it's especially in moments like this one, which, you know, only come along maybe once every few centuries. We're very privileged to live in a moment like this. You know, most of the time, people can't fully understand the character of the moment until much later, right? Historians look back and they analyze all of these different things that led to this happening. It is remarkable how many things had to converge perfectly to be in this kind of revolutionary moment. You had to have a senile, highly unpopular president who cooed the prior president and then immediately, you know, set the country and the world on fire. You had to have him replaced with an extraordinarily unpopular vice president who in many ways embodied all of the modern pathologies of the left. You had to have censorship lifted on Twitter. You had to have this sort of decade of bubbling under the surface, like molten kind of online right beginning to take shape. And then you had to have Trump win. All of these things happening at once converged, lifting of censorship online, Trump victory, this kind of new hip digital native online cadre with arguments and a kind of mimetic power that the left just wasn't expecting, all converged at once. And even for me, it's shocking at the moment we're in now. It feels like people said 2016 was the death of an old world and the birth of a new one. In many ways, it increasingly feels like 2016 to 2024 was the sort of transitional period where the old world was dying and the new world was struggling to be born. And now, finally, we have entered the new world. And I have no idea what's going to happen, but it does feel like all of the old rules of politics are gone and everything is possible.
Well, and like we were saying, you know, this is just the beginning. You know, it's only a few weeks in. USAID, while it has a budget that is noticeable, as we pointed out, you can easily buy and sell a few countries with it. It is not itself. It's only the beginning. The Department of Education, the Department of Defense, like there's so much corruption, so much graft, and most importantly, so many specifically political jobs that still need to be ferreted out. And I hope that Elon continues. The name of the episode is Defunding the Total State. And, we've seen what the beginning of that looks like, but the conclusion of it is way more severe, right? Like we already saw Marco Rubio say, we're cutting the staff down to 20 people or something, right? Like they're literally, I made the joke. And this is one of the tweets that went really wide that I had, when Elon first took over Twitter and cut 80% of the employees, and it still basically ran the same. It's like, imagine if Elon could do that with the federal government. And here we are, like we are actually in that timeline. And so to defund the total state, as you pointed out, is not just these government agencies. It's not just, the foreign aid, but it's this vast network of NGOs, of educational institutions, universities, everything else that needs to be pulled out. Like, you've got to get all of it. You can't, I said this in my piece, the Machiavelli quote, if you're going to do an injury to your enemy, make sure it's so severe that you do not have to worry about reprisal. That's got to happen here. If you just wound these agencies, then they will come back and destroy you, right? Like, they've got to be inoperable by the time you are done. If you don't do that, if you do half a revolution, you'll be digging your own grave, right? And that's what the right needs to grasp now. They have struck at the core of the enemy. They're not just, we're going to adjust the budget a little bit, might get another one of those, vetoes. Don't worry, marginal tax rates. But no, we are talking about, there's a reason the left is just absolutely losing their mind right now, because they know you are really attacking the base of their power. And you can't do that and then just walk away. You either finish it off or it will finish you off.
Yeah, I was thinking about the Elon example this morning, actually, because it is a perfect example. He cut something like 80% of Twitter's workforce at the time, Twitter. And rather than collapsing, there were marginal technical difficulties, right? Like, that was the effect of cutting 80% of the employees, is that there were glitches. It went down every once in a while and it was up within a few hours. There were minor display problems. Like, that's what cutting 80% of the workforce did to Twitter. What people have to understand, and this is where the right sort of storytelling power really needs to kick into gear. And we have plenty of material, but we have to puncture through kind of legacy media narratives, is all of these institutions are fake. I mean, they're very real in terms of the political power they exercise, but in terms of their actual function relative to their sort of the stated story they tell about themselves, the story they tell about what they do, totally unrelated. They do very little of what they claim to do. And their actual function is political activism, subversion, supporting this gigantic lefty activist NGO industrial complex. I've got dear liberal family members who I love very dearly, but, are politically wrong about everything and read the New York Times and think it's true, who there's a full court press happening in legacy media outlets like the New York Times right now to portray the poor plight of the federal bureaucrats as this new aggrieved victim class. And there's all these hilarious, I'm surprised it hasn't caught on right-wing Twitter more. There's all these hilarious stories of these dramatic photos of federal bureaucrats posing outside their walk-up in Capitol Hill, and they had to move. They had to move neighborhoods because they got, their cushy $150K dollars a year salary cut a little bit or something. What the American people have to understand, because you do, as regardless of how much you think any of this is related to the democratic will, you do need a degree of sort of political support to continue carrying this out, because politicians do care about their poll numbers. They care about getting reelected, and they do get skittish if you do something that's super, super unpopular. What has to be communicated to Americans is that all of these institutions are fake. They're not doing the things that they're telling you that they're doing. They're not doing the things that the media is telling you that they're doing. And just like in Twitter, 80% of the workforce is not necessary for the functions that people think they perform at Twitter, right? When you want Twitter to work, cutting 80% of the workforce isn't going to deprive you of that, right? Those people are, again, basically this gigantic bureaucratic system of lefty sinecures. as we go, I think you'll see more and more and more of that. And you'll see exposed just how fake so many of these jobs are. But the right needs to continue hammering that, because that's how you maintain political support for this stuff.
Yeah, the third level of, diversity consultant, they're not going to prevent the government from, shooting a bad guy or turning on the power if they get fired. Like it
Right.
doesn't matter. They can just be fired, and the only thing that happens is the government gets more efficient. That's actually all that happens. But yeah, so we've got a stack of super chats here that we should probably get to. But before we do, Nate, where can people find your great work?
They can follow me on X at NJHochman, NJHochman. I post all my stuff there.
Excellent. Make sure that you are, of course, checking out Nate's work. Jonathan Dinan says, 1,400 U.S. aid employees, 200 will remain, says Marco Anthony Rubio. Rage is being implemented. This is Bullmug's world. We simply live in it. Yeah, it is pretty wild that they actually did do a version of Rage, and I think it was something like 40 or 50 thousand government employees took it. So just right there, off the bat, Trump was able to fire 40 or 50,000 government employees by just being like, yeah, here's your severance pay for a few months, get out of here. It's just a beautiful thing. Matt Grader says, do we know yet whether all the money that's going to Politico was innocently for Politico Pro subscriptions? I have a hard time believing it cost $9 million for a few dozen Politico subscriptions. Yeah, so again, I think Politico has put out a statement on this. The Blaze actually has a article digging into this because the left is like, oh, this is a conspiracy theory. It's a conspiracy theory that that the U.S. government is funding Politico. Well, it turns out actually they're buying a large amount of these subscriptions. So yeah, not all of the 8 or 9 million or whatever came from U.S. aid, but it was true that a large amount of the of Politico's income, no small amount, was coming off of U.S. Taxpayer-funded subscriptions to their service. And so I don't know if ultimately you want to say that each one of those was overpriced or if there was some kind of deal. It's very clear that the federal government, and I think the Blaze article said in totality, almost $30 million going to Politico through this. I kind of doubt that it was all just because the quality of Politico reporting is just so high that government could not do their job without sending them $30 million. So yeah, I feel pretty confident saying that this was a quid pro quo and wasn't just them collecting their benign subscriptions to this very critical political magazine.
The other thing really quick is that, and this is where government funding and spending is directly connected to political power, is by cutting off Politico, you are fundamentally depriving them of the political power they had, right? When you're funding Politico subscriptions, you're funding a set number of subscriptions from a set number of outlets for all government employees. That's a legitimating function. It's saying these are the sort of formal magazines that if you work in the government, these are the ones you should be reading. These are what people who work in the government read, which gives journalists at places like Politico a direct line to the most powerful institution in the history of human politics. When you deprive them of that, you're depriving them of their legitimacy, not just the money.
What if you turn that around and said, let's just buy a bunch of Frontier magazine subscriptions? Everybody gets a subscription to the Blaze. Now that's what the White House staffers are watching. That's what all the federal government employees are watching instead of Politico. What does that do? How does that change the dynamic? You're exactly right. It's not just the money. It's the legitimization. It's the fact that this is where the news comes from. The government says this is what I should be reading. It's what they pay for. So this is where my information comes from. And these are the people I'm going to give access to. That's as important as the funds themselves flowing in.
We need to be funding right-wing Substacks. Those are going to be the new Politico.
That's right. That's right. I want all my friends' Substacks blown up by Doge. I want to see it. Will McDuffie here with just a super chat. Thank you very much for your support, sir. Really appreciate it. Florida Henry says, can we get Doge on the local level? Police and fire is a minimum 30% waste. Yeah, I mean, obviously, hopefully there's a snowball effect from this, right? You see what happens, the reform that happens at the top, and all of a sudden governors start saying, hey, why aren't we doing this with our states? Local and municipalities are saying, hey, why aren't we doing this? Why don't we have a Doge? Why isn't there someone like this for our governments, keeping them accountable? So hopefully you do get that, right? There is a snowball effect. Jonathan Dinan says, did you see the Wall Street Journal that got the Doge employee fired, who is being rehired thanks to Elon, Vance, and Trump, was a USA employee? Yes, I meant to bring that up. I say that the Wall Street Journal has their access to the White House stripped. Yeah, so apparently this journalist, I wasn't sure because I still want to verify, but I was seeing tweets going around that she at one point was a USAID employee, that she was also had been in Vox and these other leftist outlets as well. So yeah, this is a leftist journalist who may or may not have been directly employed by the very agency that she is trying to defend by doxing this guy. And like I said, yeah, it's so important that Vance stood up and said, we do not give these people a win. They do not get a scalp. Like, that is so critical, and I cannot be happier that that was actually the response.
I will say just really quickly to the last question about police and firemen, I'm all for cutting waste, but police and firemen are basically the only appendage of the patronage system that's like a right-wing patronage system.
Yeah, that's very true.
So if we're going to cut waste anywhere, that would be the last place I would want to cut it.
Yeah, hit the diversity hires at the library system before you get to the police.
That's right.
Yeah, that's true. Skeptical Panda says, lefties, but I called you racist, the new right, and this gives you power over me. Do you feel in charge? Yes. We are all throwing the Bane meme back at them now. Michael Robertson says, JD Vance explicitly and directly supported the return of the racist Doge employee. This should end any and all debate about whether JD is our guy. Yeah, I think it's really that simple. I have been a JD Vance fan for a while, not just because he's followed me for a very long time, but also because I think that he is an excellent heir for Trump. Like, I think that handing the movement off to him would be incredibly important. Some people have told me, oh, well, he's a creature of Peter Thiel, or he's owned by whatever, and so he can't be trusted. But I don't know, man, guys, what do you want at this point? Like, the guy is literally fighting for anons to keep their jobs in the federal government. Like, I don't know, man. Like, I really don't know. What can these guys do if not this? Let's see here. Robert Weinsfeld says, relishing the W's, Trump continues to deliver for us MAGA chuds. Also, Nate doing the RFK and slipping a Zen in. Good stuff, man. That's right. Powered by Zen. You guys haven't memed me into doing chewing tobacco yet, though. Good try. I appreciate.
Oh, that's the hardcore, chewing tobacco.
Well, I mean, you're just doing a modified version, but yes.
Yeah, I know, but it's it's the hardcore chuds do chewing tobacco.
Yeah, I grew up in the part of the country where you put the chaw in and you had the spit bottle. So that
there you go.
That's
Real
what
America.
I see. Yeah,
real America.
Tiny Stupid Demon says, I'm not tired of winning, but I have found myself getting light-headed a couple times in the last week or so. Had to break out the smelling salts. Yeah, I mean, from time to time, pour yourself a glass of tea, sit on the porch, but we're going to get back in there. We're not tired of winning yet. Don't throw your back out, pace yourself, but make sure you're ready because the winning will continue. Jonathan Dinan again says, eternal black pillars once again black-pilled because they keep taking L after L. Yeah, it's a rough time for the nothing ever happens guys. You really got to be committed to that cause at this point if you're echoing that at this point.
I will say really quickly, in the recent blow up over like the US is going to take over Gaza stuff, which I very much don't think is going to happen, but it's worth saying is like a very bad idea. Right. The people, the sort of right-wing voices that were, condemning it the loudest, it was clearly like a gloating thing. Like there is a sort of section, which everyone who watches the show, I'm sure, is familiar with, of people on the right who stake their entire political reputations on opposing Trump and saying he was a cuck, he was a squish, he was going to sell out to Israel, do X, Y, Z, whatever your line of critique is. That obviously didn't happen, right? If you look at the last few weeks, and all of these people have been totally humiliated by the last few weeks and are obviously desperate for they're actively rooting for Trump to fail because it sort of intersects with their personal interests.
Yeah, if they don't, then their entire commentating career just explodes. Right?
Exactly.
Like, where's their audience go if Trump keeps delivering and doesn't like completely just collapse at some point? Then what does that mean for these guys?
Right. And for those guys, like it was transparent with the Trump Gaza comments. Like it was the first thing they could latch on to because it was the first like comment he made that you could argue was a bad idea from the right wing perspective. Those people should just be ignored. Like it's obviously ridiculous and they totally humiliated themselves and discredited themselves. So just, everyone should keep that in mind going forward, I think.
Yeah, I really think that ultimately, I've been interviewed on this a couple times, and I think that his statements there were mainly was like the same thing with the tariffs in Canada. Like, did he really think
Mhm.
that we were going to be imposing 25% tariffs on Canada for 4 years? I seriously doubt it. It
Yeah.
was a rhetorical, it's a negotiation chip. He does this kind of stuff all the time. I think it's the same thing of Gaza. I think he knows that he's not going to develop it and turn it into like Las Vegas. I think bombastic as Trump can be, he's aware of that. But if he isn't for some reason, then yeah, let's go ahead and just put ourselves on record saying that's a super stupid idea. The United States should not be, doing anything in the Middle East and not taking over any territory or taking responsibility of it. We
Yeah.
voted for America first. That's what we want. That said, I seriously doubt that was going to be the case. And yeah, the fact that, he's on stage with BB, it's over, he's sold out. I was like, calm down, guys. Just give the man some time to work.
The funny thing is, like, if you looked at Netanyahu's face, I don't want to get like too into reading it, but I'm sure you saw the clips. He looked horrified.
Yes.
when Trump said
Yes.
it, which even more suggests this is like not going to happen, right?
That's
he was
what I
like,
said.
wait, what?
Exactly. That's
You know?
exactly what I said. From the body language, it's very clear that these guys are like not best buddies. Like,
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
I know that that's, the storyline for a lot of people, but I just think that's very clear, which, again, one of the things that will make like both Ben Shapiro and, what's his face? Why have I suddenly forgotten Nick Fuentes angry?
Oh,
Like
yeah.
both of them will be angry if it turns out that Trump isn't actually obsessed with Israel and in the thrall of BB Netanyahu. So sorry for both of them, I guess, if that ends up to be the case. Condolences that both of you have the same hope that he's desperately sold out to these people. You tell me which one's right wing. Matt Greedier says the problem with the racist tweets thing is that I think Elon believes all the anti-racist crap that these journalists cry out for 24/7. He called all of us racist for hating HB1. Yeah, whatever, man. Like, I get it. Like, yes. Would it be great if he was, not giving any of this stuff credence 100%? Yes, that would be fantastic. But take a W. Just let it happen, man. And eventually, if having an errant tweet or two doesn't end your career, that opens the door. Like, the left knows this. That's why they're screaming about it. Okay, they understand that not getting fired for this speech is the first step in saying, okay, well, maybe people can just hold opinions and it doesn't matter, right? Like, and they recognize this. The minute that you don't immediately get fired and destroyed for having these opinions is the minute that people are just allowed to have opinions because, America, that's the point. And so I think it's a win. Yeah, would it be great if Elon didn't buy into some of the leftist rhetoric? Yes, of course. Does he employ the guy? Fine. He wins. I'll give him credit. I don't care. Florida Henry says, are any boomer conservatives involved in this current auditing going on? I got to say, I'm pretty sure that Elon prefers to have younger, hungrier guys. And interestingly enough, another aspect of this that I don't think is properly being discussed right now on the right is the fact that the left is screaming about every one of these guys being under 30, right? Like, they are just, every headline is, can you believe a 24-year-old had access to nuclear codes? Can you believe a 26-year-old had the ability to see my social security number? Yeah, man. Like, these are the guys who launch weapons of mass destruction. Like, that's the average age of the guy in the military doing these jobs. So yes, I'm not surprised that a 24-year-old engineer is the one doing this. And by the way, Democrats, if you don't think any 24-year-old should ever have a position of power, should ever have a successful career, should ever be a professional, great. Please keep saying that. Please keep selling that to young people. We hate you and you should never have a job of any consequence. Please make that a central aspect of your platform. I can't pay you enough to do this. Please do that.
Well, the other irony is, like, the left has spent the last, 50 plus years talking about how we need to listen more to young people, and young people are the future, and young people are so inspiring, and we should lower the voting age. We, these young sort of high school activists who, they're the ones who are really the authority on these things, and we need to listen to them. That was like a central plank of the left wing worldview, was that really young people were like the font of political wisdom in America, even though they obviously weren't, speaking as a young person. So it's just ironic, right? Well, that was clearly only contingent on young people having left-wing opinions. It wasn't actually anything more than that.
Yep. Now that they're right-wing, turns out we can't have them near any power. Just make, maybe they can all go work at Panda Express. That's going to be the Democrats. Go manage a Panda Express. That'll be their new campaign platform. Good luck. Let's see. Something in German. Don't expect me to try to do that. I think we shouldn't discard the Cthulhu swims left just yet. We still need it to explain the greater span of history. Yeah, I actually agree. To be clear, a moment of victory doesn't address the structural problem of leftism. That doesn't mean that you should say, oh, well, the right can never win. That was never the point of saying Cthulhu always swims left. The point was to explain why there's a structural drift to the left when it comes to especially power and intellectual spaces and large bureaucratic organizations. And so that saying never meant that the right can't win and you shouldn't try to win. That's the misunderstanding of that phrase. It was talking about the way in which the left kind of seeks to operate on a principle of entropy. And so, understanding that theory is important, and I think it's still true. But don't memify that into the idea that like, oh, well, the right can't win. So if the right does win, the theory is wrong. That's not how it works. And Matt once again says, how could the old regime claw its way back knowing what we know now? Their legitimacy has been destroyed more and more every day, still have 4 years left. The answer is if Trump doesn't follow through. If Trump does not follow through, if they leave the enemy wounded, but able to retaliate, they will retaliate. And as amazing as it seems to you now, the public can immediately forget this stuff in 2 months. They really can. Do not have trust in the public. Sorry. Like, I don't know. I know we're using populist energy here, but the first rule of elite theory is don't ever think that the populace cannot be led to believe something. If the left snaps back and recovers all the institutional power and starts pushing all its propaganda again, they can forget all of this. So how do they win? If Trump doesn't follow through, that's the answer.
I will say just really quickly on that too, like there are no permanent victories or defeats in politics for the most part. As heady as this moment is now, as good as victory feels, and we should savor it, we should celebrate it. This has been a long time coming. There will be setbacks and losses. Like Republicans will lose elections. The right will be fighting rearguard actions on certain things. The left will have cultural victories. These are still extraordinarily powerful institutions and actors that we're up against. And their power is not going to go away overnight, right? Like it takes a generation to undo the kind of entrenched power that we're talking about. So people shouldn't assume that because we're winning now, we're going to keep winning forever. We are going to lose battles. But if we keep pressing at this pace, I think, we will win the war.
Yeah, don't let the it's over, we're back cycle kind of destroy your psyche. Remember that this is a long battle and it's great to win now and you need to continue to win. You need to have the passion to continue, but that doesn't mean, like you said, there won't be setbacks, there won't be moments of loss, and it doesn't mean you don't need to continue to keep up the work that you've won the victory and now you can just go grill or whatever. All of these things need to be remembered as we move forward. All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. As always, it's great talking to Nate. Make sure that you're following his work. And if it's your first time on this channel, you need to go ahead and subscribe on YouTube, click the bell notification, all that jazz. If you would like to get this broadcast as a podcast, you need to go to wherever you catch your podcasts and subscribe to the Auron MacIntyre Show. Leave a rating or a review. It helps with the algorithm. If you'd like to pick up my book, The Total State, you can do that both in print and audio. And if you would like to support the show with some merch, head over to shopblazemedia.com. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And as always, I will talk to you next time.